Governor Gretchen Whitmer announced her plan to increase Michigan's population.
That's one of dozens of reports trumpeting the news out of Michigan.
That Gretchen Whitmer has lost her mind?
Maybe so. Is Michigan's governor out of touch with the reality of overshoot and overpopulation?
That's just one of the news stories we'll unpack next.
Calling. Call the GrowthBusters. Whoa.
Welcome to the GrowthBusters podcast about coming to terms with limits to growth. If you've been questioning our society's crazy obsession with growth, you're not alone. Everyone may not be talking about it, but most of us have been thinking, it's insane. It's not improving our lives at all. It's taking a tremendous toll on the planet, and it's just not physically possible to grow forever on a finite planet. Well, in this podcast, we do talk about it. So welcome home. We're your people. I'm Dave Gardner, director of the documentary GrowthBusters Hooked on Growth.
And I'm Stephanie Gardner, GrowthBusters board member, environmental law and policy buff, and sustainable energy nerd. You'll find us at growthbusters.org. Search for GrowthBusters on Facebook, Twitter, groups.io, and of course your podcast app for the latest growth-busting news.
Well, Stephanie, I'm kind of excited that all we're doing really is a newscast today.
Yeah, we've got a lot of stories to catch up on, don't we?
Yeah, there's just been so many interesting things happening in the news that there's just no way we could cover them by tacking a story or two on to the end of every episode of the podcast. So we just decided, heck, we'll just make a growth-busting news episode. So here we are. And still, we had to be pretty picky about what we're going to share. So what's first?
Well, first up on the list, there was a new article out in the journal Nature, which is, one of the bigger journals. It usually gets a lot of press when things are interesting and hit there. And I think this is some research that came out of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. It's called A Just World on a Safe Planet. First study quantifying Earth system boundaries. And I think in the literature, we've seen Earth system boundaries stuff before, but I think they are kind of redoing it again, rehashing with a different way of looking at things. And of course, it's showing that we're beyond our system boundaries in many ways. And honestly, I didn't think that was the most interesting part of this. What I found to be interesting is they say, I guess I'll quote, they said, "We provide all stakeholders with scientific boundaries that can enable a prosperous and equitable world development on a stable planet, a better future for people and planet. This new science functions as input to the development of science-based targets. These can be adopted by cities, businesses, and countries to address the systemic global crises of climate change, biodiversity loss, nutrient overloading, overuse of water, and air pollution." And to me, it seems like they kind of fall short of saying we need to just redo how we exist as humans on the planet. It's like, oh yeah, we can just develop as long as we have these scientific inputs that we have to consider. And it's just the same thing over and over again. What was your take on this?
Well, first of all, I'm really ticked off that you even brought this up because I didn't want to talk about it. I've been following Johan Rockström's work on this since 2009 when he first came up with this planetary boundaries concept, which seemed to be pretty scientifically based, and a lot of people have paid attention to that. So it's confusing to me. 14 years later, why are they coming out with this report and saying this is the first time? What is first about it to begin with? And it's certainly not the only analysis that's attempted to measure our impact on the planet and whether we're playing outside of bounds or not, because the Global Footprint Network, as you know, gives us a good report every year. So those scientists could probably explain it to us, hopefully explain it to us better than that report did, because it is just mystifying. They do set up boundaries, but it looks like in this report there's only 8 boundaries, and in the original planetary boundaries there were 9. And it does, Stephanie, doesn't it say that we are out of bounds on several of those ESBs, as they refer to them? So that's definitely not a rosy story. And yet the language that you quoted does sort of sound like it's a little Pollyannish. It almost sounds like they're trying to compete with Kate Rayworth and her Donut Economics project, which is successfully signing on countries and cities to try to embrace some new metrics and boundaries of their own.
Maybe this is a rebranding effort.
Second up is the story that we teased and something that we'll spend a little bit of time on. I want to spend some time on it because it's really one of my pet peeves when local or regional or state policymakers exhibit their growth addiction and their complete ignorance of overshoot.
Yeah, I can tell that this one is a bee in your bonnet, and I'm happy to let you stand on your soapbox a little bit on this. And I think you've pulled some good clips that really illustrates your points too. So let's dig in.
Okay, here we are with the bee in my bonnet department. That should be a regular feature.
Yeah.
June 1st, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who there's a lot to like about her. She's been pretty vocal about women's reproductive health and issues like that. Anyway, she addressed Michigan's sluggish population growth during her keynote address at the Mackinac Policy Conference. And I pieced together a few bits of her address just to give you a sense of what's going on. Let's listen.
Our goal is to grow Michigan. And to succeed, we've got to do it together. We're making progress, but we've got to do more. It is time for a growth strategy. Growing our state and economy requires progress on all three of these fronts. This morning, I signed an executive order establishing the Growing Michigan Together Council. The council will identify a specific population goal for 2050. They will map out how to use all the different levers that we have.
So in this address, she wasted no time. Less than 2 minutes into the address, here is what she had to say.
As we approach the second quarter of this century, Michigan must actively work to grow our state's population, to spur economic growth, to lead the future of key industries like mobility and chips and clean energy, and ensure an exceptional quality of life at a great cost of living to everyone who calls this great state home.
So she wants to grow the population to spur economic growth. And she equates that with high quality of life and a low cost of living. So there's two bees in my bonnet on that right away, equating economic growth with high quality of life and a low cost of living. There really is not a real direct connection between them. And in fact, today, since we are in overshoot, we're into uneconomic growth. So the more we grow the economy today, the lower our quality of life and the higher our cost of living. She doesn't know that. She hasn't read any Herman Daly, clearly.
Yeah, and I think she's falling into the same trap of all of the cities that are trying to grow. And yeah, it's maybe a better quote unquote quality of life for the developers and the wealthiest, and everyone else just has to sit in traffic or
pay higher taxes,
subsidize extending water lines and extending roads. And, you know, who's benefiting from that deal? Not everyone, that's for sure.
No, but if you've got an asphalt paving company or you're in the concrete business or the media business, you will do well with more and more growth. And, first of all, I want to comment a little more about this economic growth thing where it's frequently conflated with improvement of our lives. And that happens because we've had some great improvements that just happened to come along while we were in a period of robust economic growth. But think about it. Let's talk about electricity. Did economic growth cause that to be invented? Did economic growth cause the invention of indoor plumbing? What do you think? No. You did not need faster and faster economic throughput for those things to be invented. Now, maybe they got adopted more quickly because there was more money available to buy those products. But the germ of the idea, the innovation, I can guarantee you Thomas Edison wasn't sitting in his lab saying, "Wow, look at that. The economy grew last quarter. Bingo, electricity."
Yeah.
No, didn't work that way. And then the other thing is, I think this is newsworthy because the governor of Michigan here readily admits that she wants to grow the population in order to have economic growth. And we talk about that all the time, that's why policymakers are so hung up on growing the population, but they rarely admit it. And especially at the local and regional level, usually what they will say, they use language like, we want to bring jobs or create jobs. And they do that because they know if they tell the citizens, we want to grow the population here, the citizens will revolt because it's the citizens who are sitting in congested traffic, who are breathing the pollution and dealing with the air quality issues and worrying about where their water is going to come from and why their taxes are going up.
And paying exorbitant costs for housing that becomes extremely limited. Yeah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so usually it's code. Usually they just talk about attracting jobs or bringing jobs, and that's code for growing the population. The real estate developers and the home builders, they know it, and they're all behind it because they know they need to grow the population if they want to keep their vacation home in Phoenix and their ski condo and their villa in France and their private jet. So anyway, it's noteworthy that she's just come right out and said, I want to grow the population.
Pretty blatant.
Now, at one point in her address, I did get the impression that she might be familiar with the exponential nature of population growth because she said this.
Turn of the 20th century, Michigan was home to 2.4 million people. 20 years later, our population grew 51% to nearly 3.7 million. In 1970, it was 8.9 million people, a 140% increase in 50 years. That's what we are capable of.
So she is all over this population growth thing. Now, interestingly, Michigan did lose about 40,000 people from 2020 to 2022. You can almost excuse her for being a little bit extra alarmed about that if she thought, oh my gosh, population has peaked for Michigan and it's starting to decline. We see people wringing their hands about that at the national level around the world. And of course, we wish they weren't wringing their hands about it because that's exactly what needs to happen. And we would want Michigan's governor to celebrate that as well. But she doesn't believe that Michigan's population growth has peaked. She's looking at the last 10 years and it grew 2% from 2010 to 2020. But it's close to the bottom of the list in terms of ranking states as to how fast their population's growing. So she came right out and said it. It's not growing fast enough. Now, that same day, she established the Growing Michigan Together Council and appointed Michigan's first ever chief growth officer. Per the news releases, the Chief Growth Officer will lead efforts to grow Michigan's population, economy, and reputation as the best place to live, work, raise a family, and start a business. Now, Stephanie, it's just shocking to me to hear this in 2023. The governor should be aware that we're deep into overshoot, and part of that is overpopulation. She's not even ashamed of the fact. She's not even trying to hide the fact that she is trying to grow the population of Michigan. She's just coming right out and admitting that that's what they're pursuing. Now, here's an interesting thing, Stephanie, you know this. If they're successful at making Michigan the place everyone wants to call home, well, what happens? Michigan will grow until it's so crowded and so choking on the costs of growth that no one will want to call it home.
Yep.
The press release is just chock full of, wonderful celebratory language. The CEO of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation was quoted as saying, as Michigan's first ever Chief Growth Officer, Hillary Doe, working in concert with the Growing Michigan Together Council, will ensure we stay united in our efforts and take the steps necessary to guarantee Michigan remains in a prosperous and thriving state for years to come. Just wanted to point that out. Those are keywords that are always used in pro-growth propaganda: prosperous and thriving. Of course, all of these guys are thrilled because the easiest way to grow your revenue and profits is just to show up in a growing market. Gosh, I thought pretty highly of Gretchen Whitmer. She seems pretty sharp, but, just like every other elected official in the United States, it seems like, since birth, she has been fed a steady diet of pro-growth assumptions. Even the Michigan League of Conservation Voters was quoted as lauding this.
That is really surprising. That's wild to me. Were you able to find any negative coverage of all this?
I haven't seen any. It's a dead planet policy. That's what it is. Gretchen Whitmer might as well have walked out on that stage and said, guess what? I'm going to pull out all the stops so that Michigan does its part to kill this planet and make sure our children do not have a chance at living decent lives. Sorry, Gretchen. Epic fail.
We need one of those buzzer sounds for you for your Bee in Your Bonnet segment.
Now, there is this report. The Citizens Research Council of Michigan released a report called Michigan's Path to a Prosperous Future, Challenges and Opportunities. And according to this report, Michigan has been losing ground over the past 5 decades. It has fallen behind other states in population growth, jobs, earnings, health, educational achievement, and the quality of public services at state and local levels. Well, first of all, it's not a competition. They shouldn't be worrying about whether they're ahead of or behind other states, but we're stuck in this competitive mode still.
Race to the bottom.
Yeah. For states to be competing for being the fastest growing population, that's definitely a race to the bottom. Anyway, every paragraph of that report reflects this underlying assumption that size matters, a decreasing population is bad, and an increasing population is good. It's that underlying assumption. There's no examination of it. There's no question of it. These are just things everybody knows. You would think it's conventional wisdom, but it's really conventional idiocy. Now, thankfully, and to their credit, the report does not include any recommendations for trying to increase birth rates. So we should be thankful for that. What happens if we have 50 states hell-bent to grow their population? And what happens if every nation is hell-bent to grow their population? You're playing a game that if everybody plays, then everybody loses.
So true.
Finally, one last thing is I want to just do the math. Take Michigan's current population of 10 million and assume Whitmer's growth strategy takes off and the people don't abandon it when they find out that they can't pave new roads fast enough to keep traffic congestion from getting worse and worse. If she settles for, say, 1% growth per year, I'm just picking 1% a year for easy math, then Michigan's 10 million population today will double to 20 million in 70 years. That's 2094. Will that be enough for her? If not, then that will double again to 40 million in 2164. I just wanted to point that out, that it's a Ponzi scheme. It's not a strategy that you can sustain.
Absolutely. I wonder what it would have looked like if Governor Whitmer had come out with a new council on true regional sustainability and steady state, where her goal was increasing the long-term quality of life for a sustainable level of population in the state of Michigan and focusing on enriching the lives of all the current residents and being in balance with the natural resources in the area. Yeah, it's just interesting to kind of think of that alternate weird world that we could live in.
I'm so glad you brought that up because, yeah, we know that we are living through the end of growth and that the truth is if we're smart, we will end the growth sooner rather than later. So how can the lives of Michiganders be improved? How can we provide financial security, shelter, food security? How can we meet the needs of the population of Michigan, give them good lives, and not kill the planet? That requires some different thinking than we've been doing for the...
Absolutely.
Yeah. The thinking we've had for the last 100 years isn't going to cut it. That's the council she should have appointed. Moving right along.
Signs of potential problems with our water supply.
However, the just-released groundwater model for the Phoenix area shows there is enough water to sustain growth planned and approved for much of the valley.
I don't feel like we need to spend a whole lot of time on this, but it was pretty interesting that national news was made when Arizona's governor announced that they were going to have to put limits on construction in the Phoenix area due to the results of a groundwater study. you can hardly go a day without a new news report about the Colorado River, the drying of the Colorado River, the low levels of Lake Powell and Lake Mead. So everywhere in the American West today, water is big news.
Yeah, that's so true.
But interesting about the news reporting and the official comments here was that everybody was quick to say, but this doesn't mean that growth in Phoenix is going to stop. It just means we might not be able to keep that pipeline full going forward. We've got things that are already approved to add 80,000 people to the Phoenix area. So don't worry, we're still going to grow. They're doing some good things in that they are actually trying to tie approvals of projects to known water supply. But they haven't yet been able to really bring themselves to say, you know what, we're just going to have to stop this growth game. Water is the limiting factor. We're just going to have to stop growing. I don't know how many more decades it'll take before they finally will say that.
Yeah, and the replenishment of groundwater resources is very slow. And as the Southwest continues to be in a drought, one of the quotes from the CNN article that we'll link in the show notes says that developers that are seeking to build new construction will have to demonstrate they can provide an assured water supply for 100 years using water from a source that is not local groundwater. 100 years is not thinking ahead enough.
Yeah, who do you think came up with that number? A real estate developer.
Yeah, we can build all of this stuff and all these people can move there, but what happens in a generation?
We'll be gone. We'll have made our money.
Well, you and I will.
Yeah, it won't be our problem. And because of all this concern about water and all these headlines lately, even in my hometown of Colorado Springs City Council has never met a developer they didn't like. Colorado Springs is probably the most growth-addicted community in the United States. That's what caused me to produce the documentary GrowthBusters Hooked on Growth, because I was sitting here watching this insanity. So Colorado Springs, the last city that I would ever expect to start bringing any kind of sanity into their approvals of growth, all of a sudden, even Colorado Springs has begun to limit annexations unless we know we have the water. So that's big. They're already starting to show signs of figuring out ways to weasel around that a little bit. But it's big news that even Colorado Springs is thinking about limiting annexation because the citizens are woke about water and limits of water in the American West. All right, what's next?
We've got Canada also on the please immigrate to here train on the bandwagon along with Michigan, I guess. I don't think I realized this about Canada, but it sounds like it's been a policy of theirs for many decades. Yeah, so this article is all about how do they direct people to where they want them to go, because it sounds like the major metropolitan areas are bursting at the seams with people, and housing costs, of course, have gone up. And so they really want people to immigrate into rural regions. And so they're trying to figure out how to funnel people. One interesting thing is this article says that it has relied on a system where immigrants are assigned points based on their age, education, employment opportunities, and English or French abilities, allowing the country to target skilled workers to, really seek out just the right kind of immigrants that they want to meet these different quotas that they have in mind. And really, to me, it's like commodifying people.
Absolutely. They're blatantly admitting it. They don't even know enough to be ashamed of it. They don't even know enough that they should try to hide it. They're trumpeting it. They're bragging about the fact, hey, Canadians, don't be worried about this. We're not bringing in the riffraff. We're just engaging in brain drain. We're bringing in the best and the brightest from other countries. Those other countries don't need them. They don't deserve them. Canada wants them so that we can what? Grow our economy.
One of the most interesting quotes was they were talking about Nova Scotia in particular and The article says that the population gains contributed to a 9.3% annual jump in Halifax's rents for a 2-bedroom apartment as of October, the largest increase of any major Canadian city. But to Mayor Mike Savage, the strains are worth it. As he put it, problems of growth are easier to manage than problems of stagnancy. Wow.
Yeah, and it's noted in here that real GDP per capita has been little changed over the past decade. So even though I think GDP per capita, I don't believe that is a very good measure of well-being, as you would expect. But among the GDP obsessed, that's a pretty typical way to measure well-being or to approximate well-being. And here they're admitting, well, by our crazy measure, we're not making Canadians' lives better at all, but we are growing our aggregate economy. That gives us bigger numbers to brag about. Don't you love that? And of course, the profiteers of growth, the real estate developers, the media companies, the big businesses that want a growing market, of course, they're all happy with that. But most Canadians are not happy about the government's new grow at all costs strategy. And immigration, that's a touchy subject. I think every nation should have a compassionate immigration policy. They should welcome refugees, but I don't think they should be trying to steal the best and the brightest from other companies in order to grow their economy.
And from other countries.
Yeah. Did I not say that?
You said from other companies.
Yeah, I meant other countries. It's, like you said, dehumanizing. So there.
Wow, I see another bee in your bonnet.
No, that's the so there department.
The so there segment.
Yeah.
I think we should definitely talk about the piece in Newsweek by Kirsten Stade.
Yeah, what is going on with population balance?
They're getting a lot of great press.
Yeah, they are
Yay.
prolific. They write great stuff, and they're getting it published. So yeah, Kirsten Stade, the communication director or manager for Population Balance, has a new piece as of June 13th in Newsweek. Headline is Saying Out Loud What Others Won't Even Whisper About Climate Change. And I thought this was pretty cool. What did you think?
Well, yeah, I missed the news that John Kerry, who is our U.S. climate envoy, apparently said that he didn't think that the projected 10 billion people on the planet was sustainable. I somehow missed that. I don't know if that came across your radar.
Yeah, it did. And I thought, wow, that's huge. I can't believe he said that. But
he stopped short there. He didn't say anything else. And in fact, I think even given the opportunity to say, we need to work on our consumption and decrease our birth rate, like he just said, people can make their own choices. People will do what they're going to do. He didn't really put forth any policy ideas or an action plan of any kind. He just sort of threw out that he was concerned about it or didn't think it was sustainable. So Kirsten takes him to task.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool that she points out that it's not like the Biden administration is powerless. In fact, effective solutions, she writes, are well within its reach. We are really underfunding aid to parts of the world that could really benefit from good family planning assistance, for one thing. We're busy making it harder and harder for women in our own country to make their own decisions about family size. We're not championing nearly enough small family decisions, good family planning, contraception, good sex education. There's a lot we could be doing.
Yeah, she specifically calls out a couple of interesting numbers. One was that we spend $38 billion on federal meat and dairy subsidies, and it would only take $2 billion for international family planning assistance to make sure that the 218 million women in the global south who wish to avoid pregnancy and have an unmet need for contraception could have that access. So really stark numbers. But, I think what Nandita and Kirsten have done with their recent press is done a really good job of citing evidence, but also just having some really great, concise, smart talking points that are really compelling. They've been really great at communicating on the subject. So huge kudos to both of them.
Yeah. In fact, I'll read the last paragraph. Kerry's remarks may be an indication that global leaders are finally willing to acknowledge population growth and meat consumption as major threats to the climate and planetary systems that support our lives. That's good as far as it goes, but it's not enough. They need to put their money where their mouths are and take action. And it's so true.
Yep, bravo.
So we'll put a link in the show notes to this and really every news story that we've talked about in this episode.
Including the last one, which I don't think we'll talk about, but I still think we should link. It's just called Population Growth is the Main Driver of Increased Carbon Emissions. Study finds by Swedish Research Council. So we'll link to that and you can check that out as well.
That's definitely worth mentioning because it's a really great piece of information and really some good ammo for sustainable population advocates who are constantly facing rebuttals from people who are really just uncomfortable talking about overpopulation and the role of good family planning and well-considered, informed family-size decisions in leaving future generations a decent chance at having a good life. A lot of people who are well-intentioned, good-hearted, but who are uncomfortable talking about that will try to point out, it's not population. If you're trying to reduce carbon emissions, the problem is the overconsumptive behavior of the rich world. Because the people who have the high birth rates, they're living in very poor parts of the world. They hardly have a carbon footprint. You get that a lot. And this report does a real good job of explaining why that's just really not accurate and doesn't serve us well to take that attitude. It's just not true.
Yeah, it's a good myth buster to have in the back pocket.
It seems to me like it should be a bust enough just to say, are you determined to make sure that the poorest people in the world remain poor? Because that's the only way that their carbon footprint doesn't matter.
We didn't have a ton of listener feedback, but we had a couple of things. Arthur in California sent us an email and he wrote, in 2022, the Sierra Club decided to terminate programs that deal with population issues. As chair of a very active and effective Committee for a Sustainable World Population for the Motherlode chapter in North Central California, I was told we could not use the word population in any of our public outreach activities, so I sadly stepped down as chair after more than 10 years in that position. Unfortunately, I believe that putting blinders on to be politically correct caused the policy change. Our committee focused almost entirely on improving the natural environment and quality of life by expanding voluntary family planning education and affordable contraception for all, regardless of race, religion, or income level. I hope the Sierra Club will realize their error and correct their mistake ASAP.
Yeah, and if you've been following this subject for long, then it's probably not news to you that the Sierra Club really changed its messaging and thinking about population quite some time ago, and a number of members of the Sierra Club and a number of knowledgeable people in the environmental community who realize that you can't calculate the area of a rectangle without looking at both the width and the length. They've been disappointed in the Sierra Club for quite some time. And I happen to know Evan Jones, who has been one of the most active members of that chapter of the Sierra Club and was doing really great work about overpopulation awareness and promoting family planning. So thanks, Arthur, for pointing that out. I don't see any reason to expect the Sierra Club to realize their error and correct their mistakes anytime soon, but we can hope. Share this episode of GrowthBusters and every episode of the Overpopulation podcast with Sierra Club leadership every chance you get, without being a pest. Do it in a nice way.
Good advice.
I want to offer a quick note about one last thing in the listener feedback department. A couple of episodes ago, we shared an email from Don Welkin. Somewhat unrelated to the comment we shared, Don had included in his email a draft of policy recommendations that he's been working on with a chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby. And he included this draft titled A Proposed Policy Agenda for the 2023 Farm Bill, Healthy Farms and Forests Policy Recommendations. And I wrote back to Don Thanks so much for writing, Don. We'll take a good look at your recommendations. They may be helpful in developing the platform for a presidential campaign. So this turned into a slightly inaccurate statement in a recent episode of one of my favorite podcasts, Crazy Town. Stephanie, have you ever listened to Crazy Town?
I can't believe you haven't recommended this to me.
Oh my gosh. You need to check it out. It's put out by the Post-Carbon Institute, and the three co-hosts are a lot of fun and really quite knowledgeable. So I can't recommend it highly enough. So it caught my attention when they mentioned, I think in the last episode of this season, they mentioned that they had heard from Don, and they got the impression anyway that I am running for president. Dave Gardner, co-host of the GrowthBusters podcast, is running for president, and that I've adopted Don's policy agenda as part of my platform. Somehow they got that impression, and that's a little premature. So Don, thanks for that document, and the people who are working on a platform for what might end up being a run for president by Dave Gardner are definitely going to look at that, and I'd be shocked if it didn't inform the platform a lot. It looks like it's really good recommendations, but I haven't even had a chance yet to read the entire document. But if you want to know if I am running for president and when that campaign might be launching, or if you want to be involved in that campaign, I guess I can put a link in the show notes to help you investigate that. Because you didn't hear it here.
Very mysterious. We love hearing from you. We'll share the most interesting feedback on our next episode if you email us at podcast@growthbusters.org. You could also write a comment on this episode's page on our GrowthBusters website. That's growthbusters.org. Or you can always leave a voice message for us. Our phone number is 719-402-1400. So share your feedback, and we'll hopefully share some of that on one of our next episodes.
Yeah, come on, don't be shy. Call that GrowthBusters hotline and leave us a recording so we can play that. All right, one last thing.
Honey, I shrunk my footprint. I feel like we have been skipping it a lot, so I'm excited to share mine today.
Oh, good. You got another good one? Your last time was pretty good.
Yeah. Well, I guess for those of our listeners that don't know our segment, Honey, I Shrunk My Footprint, it's where we share something unusual. So it could be something difficult or easy, something we're particularly proud of that we have done to live more lightly on the planet. So that's the context. And mine is, I have these glass Tupperware with the plastic snap-on lids. And I think I've had these for, at least 6 or 7 years at this point. And one of them, the lid, it has the 4 snaps on each side. It's a rectangular shape.
Yeah.
And one by one, the snaps started falling off.
Boy, you must be pretty hard on those.
I guess. I don't know. So 2 of them came off on opposite sides. And so I was still able to, snap the lid. It had the equal balance on opposite sides. And then finally, a third one fell off. And so if you snap one side, the lid is sitting ajar. It's not sitting flat, and it's definitely not liquid proof at this stage anyway. But I figured I would still try and use this Tupperware, if I keep it upright in the fridge. So what I've started doing now is I just put a rubber band around it. So I can put the lid and snap one side and then rubber band the whole thing. And it does give me a fairly airtight seal. So I'm trying to hang on to this Tupperware for as long as possible.
Good for you. That's great. Bravo. So I've got an interesting one for you. I don't know if you knew this, but I've been saving my ripped, torn Levi's jeans for at least 15 years, maybe longer. I have a stack of them. I'll wear pretty ragged clothes because I want to make them last, and way too much overconsumption to be tossing clothes just because they get a little bit worn. So I wear them out pretty good anyway. But when they finally are embarrassing for me to wear, then I put them in a stack in my closet thinking, you know what? They're not going to be too embarrassing for some fashionista out there. Right? So I'm getting ready to try recycling my stack of well-worn Levi's jeans in my closet by using secondhand.levi.com/trade-in.
Cool. I've never heard of this.
I hadn't either, but I found this when it was brought to my attention. I can't remember how. I was taken to a commentary called Shop and Sell Your Clothes Sustainably with these 13 buyback and resale programs. So I'll put a link in the show notes. So there I found mine, where Levi's will actually buy them back because they know that there are some people out there who, if they don't buy my old, worn, tattered Levi's, they're going to buy brand new ones for $200 that some company figured out a way to rip up. So I'm going to save them some money, and I'm going to save manufacturing some new clothes.
Cool. I wonder if they're too far gone, they recycle the textile material into their manufacturing process too. I wonder if that's part of the deal.
They will pay me for these jeans. Okay. But they did say that they will evaluate the jeans and they won't pay me for them if they can't resell them. But I can't remember if they said what they would do with them.
Well, can you report back? I want to know how much money you get back.
Okay.
And I want to know what they say. This is interesting. So this is hoarding turned side gig. I love this for you, Dad.
Yeah, I'll have to count the number. You'll probably be astonished at the number. So there you go. Among the companies that do have buyback programs, North Face, Patagonia, REI, and Timberland. Now, those are all outdoor gear, but good to know.
They also sell clothing. I mean, you look a little granola-y if you wear the clothing that they sell, but that's not a bad thing. No,
and we're trying to make it in. If you're wearing clothes that look like you just bought them new, that should be out, not in.
Yep, that should be not cool.
We're going to make it in to be a good citizen of the planet, to be a good ancestor for future generations. So there you go. That's it. A strange new episode of the GrowthBusters podcast. If you find it strange, but valuable, share it, please, with people you love or anyone who needs to learn about limits to growth. And that could be your governor, for sure, but it could be a senator, representative, prime minister, president, mayor, journalists, you name it.
And be sure to follow the podcast on your podcast app so that you don't ever miss a new episode.
And if you want to engage with the online GrowthBusters community, just go to groups.io and search for GrowthBusters.
Thank you to Jake Fader for writing and producing the GrowthBusters theme you hear at the open and close of the podcast, and to Carlos Jones for singing it.
And be sure to visit growthbusters.org to subscribe to the GrowthBusters email updates, or just to research more deeply these subjects that we talk about, or to make a donation to this nonprofit project. The writer's strike is killing us.
I wish we had writers. Well, if we don't run out of water first, we'll see you next time.
Brilliant. All right. You're in the writer's room now, Stephanie. Good job.
Some may dream to pave mountains and streams, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Some may just want more, but don't know what it's for, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Don't want a solution at the cost of pollution. They think bigger is better at the cost of the weather. But no, not us. We are the growth busters. Calling, 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 calling. Call the growth busters.